Question 1. The review process indicates that a large-scale commercial building project is about to commence extensive excavation and grading operations. The site is adjacent to a sensitive local creek, and the project's Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, SWPPP, has been approved. The supervisor is aware that heavy rainfall is forecasted for the upcoming week. What is the most appropriate immediate action to ensure compliance with environmental regulations? Option A. Instruct the crew to focus on completing as much excavation as possible before the rain arrives, assuming that any runoff can be managed after the fact. Option B. Immediately halt all excavation and grading activities until the forecasted rain has passed and the site can be properly stabilized. Option C. Ensure all personnel are aware of the general safety protocols and proceed with the excavation as scheduled, as the SWPPP is already approved. Option D. Deploy and inspect all required structural and non-structural best management practices, BMP, for stormwater control, as detailed in the approved SWPPP, before any significant soil disturbance occurs. Correct answer is C. Ensure all personnel are aware of the general safety protocols and proceed with the excavation as scheduled, as the SWPPP is already approved. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a safety-trained supervisor in construction, STSC, due to the intersection of construction activities with potential environmental impacts, specifically concerning stormwater runoff and its discharge into a local waterway. The supervisor must balance the need for project progress with strict adherence to environmental regulations, which are often detailed and carry significant penalties for noncompliance. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying these regulations to a dynamic construction site and ensuring that all personnel understand and follow the required procedures. The correct approach involves proactively identifying potential environmental risks associated with the construction activities, specifically the excavation and grading that will increase exposed soil surfaces. This approach mandates the implementation of best management practices, BMP, for stormwater pollution prevention, such as installing silt fences, sediment basins, and stabilized construction entrances, as outlined by the relevant Environmental Protection Agency, e.g., EPA under the Clean Water Act in the U.S. This is the correct approach because it directly addresses the regulatory requirements for preventing the discharge of pollutants into navigable waters. It demonstrates due diligence, a commitment to environmental stewardship, and compliance with federal and state environmental laws designed to protect water quality. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the excavation and grading, without any specific measures, to control stormwater runoff. This failure to implement BMPs is a direct violation of environmental regulations that require controlling pollutants from construction sites, risk significant fines, project delays, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on general safety training without specific environmental protocols for stormwater management. While general safety is important, it does not substitute for the specific requirements of environmental permits and regulations. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the distinct legal obligations related to environmental protection. A third incorrect approach would be to assume that the local municipality's general permits cover all potential environmental impacts, without verifying specific requirements for construction site stormwater discharge. This is a critical oversight, as construction sites often require specific permits and adherence to stricter standards than general municipal discharges. Professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of all applicable environmental permits and regulations before commencing any activity with potential environmental impact. This includes understanding the specific requirements for stormwater management, waste disposal, and hazardous material handling. Supervisors should consult with environmental specialists or regulatory agencies when unsure about compliance. Furthermore, it is crucial to develop and communicate a site-specific environmental protection plan to all workers, ensuring they are trained on their roles and responsibilities in preventing pollution. Regular site inspections and audits are essential to verify the effectiveness of implemented controls and to make necessary adjustments. Question 2. The risk matrix shows a moderate risk of falling debris in a specific work area. As a safety-trained supervisor in construction, what is the most appropriate PPE selection for workers in this area, considering OSHA regulations? Option A. Rely on the worker's existing safety glasses for eye protection, as head protection is not explicitly mentioned for moderate risk. Option B. Provide ANSI Z89, 1 compliant hard hats for all workers in the area. Option C. Allow workers to proceed without specific head protection if the risk is only moderate and no other immediate hazards are present. Option D. Issue general work gloves to protect hands from minor abrasions. Correct answer is B. Provide ANSI Z89, 1 compliant hard hats for all workers in the area. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the supervisor to balance immediate operational needs with the long-term safety and compliance obligations mandated by OSHA. The supervisor must not only identify the correct PPE, but also understand the underlying regulatory principles that dictate its selection and use. The correct approach involves recognizing that the risk matrix, indicating a moderate risk of falling debris, necessitates specific head protection. OSHA 29 CFR 1926, 100, head protection, mandates that employees working in areas where there is a possible danger of head injury from falling or flying material, or from electrical shock, shall wear protective helmets. The supervisor's responsibility is to ensure that the selected PPE directly addresses the identified hazard as per these regulations. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the need for head protection because the risk is only moderate, implying that some risk is acceptable without mitigation. This fails to comply with OSHA requirement for protection where there is a possible danger, regardless of the perceived severity. Another incorrect approach would be to select a type of PPE that does not adequately protect against the specific hazard identified, such as providing only safety glasses for a falling debris risk. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of the hazard and the corresponding PPE requirements under OSHA. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed or convenience over proper PPE selection, such as allowing workers to proceed without the mandated head protection while awaiting a specific type, directly violates the employer's duty to provide a safe working environment as stipulated by OSHA General Duty Clause, Section 5A. 1 of the OSH Act, and specific standards. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough hazard assessment, consults relevant OSHA standards, like 29 CFR 1926 Subpart E for PPE, selects PPE that directly mitigates the identified hazard, and ensures proper training and enforcement of PPE use. This systematic approach ensures compliance and worker safety. Question 3. Assessment of a construction site reveals numerous potential hazards, including exposed rebar, physical, dust from concrete cutting, chemical, mold growth in damp areas, biological, and repetitive lifting of heavy materials, ergonomic. Which approach best ensures the supervisor prioritizes safety efforts to prevent serious harm? Option A. Prioritizing hazards based on the total number of distinct hazard types identified across the site. Option B. Focusing safety efforts on the hazards that have resulted in the most reported near misses in the past month. Option C. Conducting a comprehensive impact assessment that evaluates the severity of potential harm and the likelihood of occurrence for each identified hazard. Option D. Addressing only the physical hazards that are immediately visible to the naked eye. The correct answer is C. Conducting a comprehensive impact assessment that evaluates the severity of potential harm and the likelihood of occurrence for each identified hazard. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for a safety-trained supervisor in construction, identifying and prioritizing the most significant hazards in a dynamic work environment. The challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial listing of hazards to a systematic evaluation of their potential impact. A supervisor must not only recognize the presence of hazards, but also understand the severity of potential harm, the likelihood of occurrence, and the effectiveness of existing controls. This requires a deep understanding of the types of hazards and their potential consequences, coupled with the ability to apply this knowledge to real-world construction activities. A professional challenge is to ensure that safety efforts are focused on the most critical risks, preventing serious injuries or fatalities. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that considers the severity of potential harm and the likelihood of occurrence for each identified hazard. This aligns directly with the principles of risk management mandated by OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration Regulation, specifically the General Duty Clause, Section 5(a)(1) of the OSH Act, which requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. A thorough impact assessment, which is a core component of a robust safety program, allows the supervisor to prioritize resources and control measures effectively. By evaluating both severity and likelihood, the supervisor can determine which hazards pose the greatest risk and require immediate attention, thereby fulfilling their ethical and regulatory obligation to protect workers. This systematic approach ensures that safety interventions are data-driven and focused on preventing the most severe outcomes. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on the number of hazards identified is an incorrect approach because it prioritizes quantity over quality and potential impact. A site might have many minor hazards, but a single severe hazard could pose a far greater risk. This approach fails to acknowledge the fundamental principle of risk assessment, which is to evaluate the potential for harm. Prioritizing hazards based on how frequently they have occurred in the past, without considering the severity of potential outcomes, is also an incorrect approach. While historical data is valuable, it may not reflect current conditions or the potential for new, more severe incidents. For example, hazard that has never caused a serious injury might have the potential for a catastrophic outcome if it occurs. This approach neglects the severity aspect of risk. Concentrating only on the most visible or easily observable hazards is an incorrect approach because it overlooks less obvious but potentially more dangerous risks. Chemical or biological hazards, for instance, may not be immediately apparent but can have severe health consequences. Similarly, ergonomic hazards, while often chronic, can lead to debilitating long-term injuries. This approach demonstrates a superficial understanding of hazard identification and risk assessment, failing to comply with the comprehensive nature of OSHA safety requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic risk assessment process. This begins with thorough hazard identification across all categories: physical, chemical, biological, ergonomic. Following identification, a detailed impact assessment is crucial. This involves evaluating the potential severity of injury or illness resulting from each hazard and the likelihood of that hazard occurring. This dual evaluation allows for the prioritization of risks, enabling the supervisor to allocate resources and implement controls where they will have the greatest effect in preventing serious harm. This aligns with the proactive and preventative nature of effective safety management under OSHA. When faced with multiple hazards, the decision-making process should always be guided by the principle of mitigating the highest risks first, ensuring compliance with regulatory mandates, and upholding ethical responsibilities to worker safety. Question 4. Upon reviewing a construction site, a safety-trained supervisor observes a carpenter working on the second story of a building without any fall protection equipment, such as a safety harness or guardrails in place. The carpenter is positioned near an unprotected edge. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the supervisor to take? Option A. Assume the carpenter is experienced and will recognize the risk and take appropriate precautions. Option B. Make a note of the observed hazard to discuss during the next toolbox talk. Option C. Proceed to the site office to locate the designated safety officer to address the situation. Option D. Immediately stop the work, ensure the carpenter is safely protected from a fall, and then discuss the importance of fall protection before allowing work to resume. The correct answer is D. Immediately stop the work, ensure the carpenter is safely protected from a fall, and then discuss the importance of fall protection before allowing work to resume. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a supervisor to not only identify a potential fall hazard, but also to immediately and effectively implement control measures, demonstrating proactive safety leadership. The supervisor must balance the urgency of the situation with the need for a systematic and compliant approach to hazard mitigation. The correct approach involves a supervisor directly observing a worker operating at height without adequate fall protection and immediately intervening to stop the work and ensure the worker is properly protected before resuming. This aligns directly with OSHA General Duty Clause, 29 CFR 1926, 20b, 1 and 29 CFR 1926, 501b, 1, which mandates employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. Specifically, 29 CFR 1926, 501 outlines the requirements for fall protection in construction. A supervisor's ethical responsibility is to prioritize worker safety above all else, which includes immediate action to prevent potential harm. An incorrect approach of merely noting the hazard for later discussion fails to address the immediate risk, violating the employer's duty to protect workers from recognized hazards. This demonstrates a lack of proactive safety management and could lead to a serious incident, constituting a regulatory failure under OSHA standards. Another incorrect approach of assuming the worker is experienced and will self-correct is negligent and ethically unsound. OSHA regulations do not permit assumptions about worker behavior when a clear hazard exists. They require active supervision and enforcement of safety protocols. This abdication of supervisory responsibility is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Finally, an incorrect approach of waiting for a safety officer to arrive before taking action delays necessary intervention and exposes the worker to unnecessary risk. While safety officers play a crucial role, supervisors on the ground have the primary responsibility to address immediate hazards. This delay is a failure to act promptly as required by safety regulations and ethical obligations. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate hazard identification and control. This involves 1. Recognizing the hazard. 2. Immediately stopping the unsafe activity. 3. Ensuring the hazard is controlled or eliminated before work resumes. 4. Documenting the incident and corrective actions. 5. Following up to ensure compliance and prevent recurrence. This systematic approach ensures both regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility. Question 5. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a subcontractor is proposing a method for a high-risk activity that they believe has a low probability of causing severe injury, based on their past experience. As the STSC, how should you proceed to ensure compliance with OSHA regulations and ethical safety standards? Option A. Prioritize the subcontractor's schedule and cost concerns, and only require additional safety measures if a near miss or incident occurs. Option B. Accept the subcontractor's assessment if their past experience is extensive and they assure you that their controls are adequate. Option C. Rely solely on the subcontractor's internal safety protocols, assuming they are compliant with all applicable regulations. Option D. Independently evaluate the proposed activity using the established site risk assessment matrix, considering both the potential severity of harm and the probability of occurrence, and consult with safety professionals if necessary. The correct answer is B. Accept the subcontractor's assessment if their past experience is extensive and they assure you that their controls are adequate. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for a safety-trained supervisor in construction, STSC, where differing stakeholder perspectives can influence risk assessment outcomes. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate operational pressures of a subcontractor with the overarching safety obligations mandated by regulatory bodies. A supervisor must ensure that risk assessments are not unduly influenced by external pressures that could compromise worker safety, adhering strictly to established methodologies and regulatory requirements. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of both the severity of potential harm and the probability of its occurrence, using a predefined risk matrix or scoring system. This methodology ensures consistency and objectivity. For example, OSHA General Duty Clause 29 CFR 1926, 20b-2, requires employers to identify and correct recognized hazards. A robust risk assessment, considering both severity and probability, is the foundational step in fulfilling this obligation. Ethically, the supervisor has a duty of care to all workers on site, which supersedes the immediate cost or schedule concerns of a subcontractor. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the subcontractor's assessment if it appears to downplay the severity or probability of a hazard due to their own operational constraints or desire to avoid costly mitigation. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement of a comprehensive and independent hazard identification and risk assessment. Another incorrect approach would be to assign a low probability to a high-severity event without a clear, documented justification based on established control measures. This can lead to underestimation of risk and inadequate safety precautions, violating the principle of proactive hazard management. Furthermore, ignoring the input of experienced site personnel who may have direct knowledge of the specific risks associated with a task is also a failure, as it bypasses valuable information that could inform a more accurate assessment. Professional decision-making in such situations requires the supervisor to first understand the established risk assessment methodology and the site's safety policy. They should then gather all relevant information, including the subcontractor's assessment, but critically evaluate it against objective criteria. If discrepancies arise, the supervisor must engage in further discussion, potentially request additional data or expert opinion, and ultimately make a determination based on the regulatory framework and the established risk assessment process, prioritizing worker safety. Question 6. Performance analysis shows that a construction project involves working with a newly developed adhesive that emits significant volatile organic compounds, VOC, posing a respiratory hazard to workers. The project manager is pushing for rapid completion. Which approach to managing this hazard best aligns with the hierarchy of controls and regulatory expectations for worker safety? Option A. Relying on the Adhesive Manufacturer's Safety Data Sheet, SDS, recommendations for ventilation and PPE, and ensuring workers follow these guidelines. Option B. Implementing a comprehensive training program on safe handling procedures and mandating the use of respirators with appropriate cartridges for all workers in the vicinity. Option C. Investigating the feasibility of substituting the new adhesive with a water-based alternative that has significantly lower VOC emissions, and if not feasible, exploring the installation of local exhaust ventilation systems. Option D. Requiring workers to wear enhanced PPE, including full-face respirators and chemical-resistant suits, to provide maximum protection during application. The correct answer is B. Implementing a comprehensive training program on safe handling procedures and mandating the use of respirators with appropriate cartridges for all workers in the vicinity. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a supervisor to balance immediate project needs with the long-term safety and health of workers, adhering strictly to the hierarchy of controls. The pressure to maintain project timelines and budgets can tempt supervisors to overlook more effective, albeit potentially more complex or costly, control measures. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen controls are not only compliant but also genuinely protective. The correct approach involves prioritizing controls that eliminate or substitute the hazard, followed by engineering controls, then administrative controls, and finally, personal protective equipment (PPE) as a last resort. This aligns with the fundamental principles of occupational safety and health regulations, which mandate employers to implement the most effective controls feasible. Specifically, regulations like OSHA General Duty Clause 29 U.S.C. 654 A.1 require employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. The hierarchy of controls is the established framework for meeting this obligation. Ethically, supervisors have a duty of care to their employees, meaning they must actively seek to prevent harm. An incorrect approach that relies solely on administrative controls without exploring elimination, substitution, or engineering solutions fails to meet the regulatory requirement for the most effective controls. For instance, relying only on training and work procedures, administrative controls, to manage exposure to a highly toxic substance, when a less toxic substitute is available or a ventilation system, engineering control, could be installed, is a regulatory and ethical failure. It places an undue burden on the worker to constantly manage a hazard that could be inherently reduced or removed. Similarly, immediately resorting to PPE without considering higher-level controls is a common pitfall. While PPE is a necessary component of a safety program, it is the least effective control because it relies on individual compliance and does not reduce the hazard at its source. Regulations emphasize that PPE should be used when other controls are not feasible or as a supplementary measure. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic risk assessment. First, identify the hazard. Second, evaluate the risk associated with the hazard. Third, brainstorm all possible control measures, starting with elimination and substitution. Fourth, assess the feasibility and effectiveness of each control measure against regulatory requirements and best practices. Fifth, select the most effective combination of controls, ensuring that higher-level controls are implemented before relying on lower-level ones. Finally, document the decision-making process and the implemented controls, and continuously monitor their effectiveness. Question 7. Implementation of a new excavation project on a previously undeveloped site requires a construction supervisor to proactively identify and mitigate potential environmental risks. Which of the following approaches best aligns with OSHA, EPA, and relevant state regulations for managing these risks? Option A. Focus solely on excavation safety protocols and address any environmental concerns that arise incidentally, without a formal pre-excavation risk assessment. Option B. Conduct a thorough site assessment to identify potential environmental hazards such as soil contamination, proximity to waterways, and presence of protected species. Then develop and implement specific control measures and emergency response plans based on this assessment. Option C. Assume that subcontractors will manage their own environmental compliance and only address issues if a specific complaint or violation is reported by an external agency. Option D. Rely on general industry best practices for excavation without consulting specific EPA or state environmental regulations, assuming they are adequately covered. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough site assessment to identify potential environmental hazards such as soil contamination, proximity to waterways, and presence of protected species. Then develop and implement specific control measures and emergency response plans based on this assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for construction supervisors, balancing the need for efficient project progression with the absolute imperative of regulatory compliance, specifically concerning environmental protection as mandated by the EPA and relevant state regulations. The professional challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential environmental hazards that may arise during construction activities, ensuring that these are addressed proactively rather than reactively. This requires a supervisor to possess a thorough understanding of applicable environmental laws and to integrate risk assessment into daily operations. A correct approach involves a systematic and proactive risk assessment process that identifies potential environmental impacts before they occur. This includes evaluating the specific construction activities planned, the site's existing environmental conditions, and the potential for hazardous material releases, waste generation, or habitat disruption. Based on this assessment, appropriate control measures are implemented, documented, and communicated to the work. This aligns with the EPA's mandate for pollution prevention and the general duty clause under OSHA to provide a safe and healthful workplace, which implicitly includes environmental safety. State regulations often provide more specific requirements for waste management, stormwater control, and hazardous substance handling, all of which are integral to a comprehensive environmental risk assessment. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on reactive measures, such as addressing environmental issues only after a spill or violation has occurred. This fails to meet the proactive requirements of environmental regulations and OSHA General Duty Clause, which emphasizes preventing hazards. It also demonstrates a lack of due diligence and can lead to significant fines, project delays, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to delegate environmental risk assessment entirely to subcontractors without adequate oversight or verification of their competence and adherence to regulations. While subcontractors have responsibilities, the primary supervisory responsibility for ensuring compliance on site rests with the general contractor and their supervisors. This abdication of responsibility is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Finally, ignoring potential environmental impacts because they are perceived as minor or unlikely is a dangerous oversight. Environmental regulations are designed to address a wide range of potential impacts, and even seemingly small issues can escalate or indicate a larger problem, leading to noncompliance. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a commitment to understanding and applying relevant legal and regulatory frameworks. Supervisors should adopt a mindset of continuous improvement, regularly reviewing their risk assessment processes and control measures. This involves staying updated on changes in OSHA, EPA, and state environmental regulations, conducting regular site inspections, and fostering a culture where environmental concerns are openly reported and addressed by all personnel. Question 8. Which approach would be most effective for a safety-trained supervisor in construction to address a situation where a newly identified potential hazard, such as an unsecured excavation edge, is discovered just as a critical concrete pour is scheduled to begin, and the delay required to properly secure the edge could impact the pour schedule? Option A. Inform the project manager that the excavation edge poses a risk but proceed with the pour as planned, suggesting that the risk is manageable given the short duration of the pour. Option B. Allow the concrete pour to proceed but assign one worker to monitor the unsecured excavation edge from a safe distance. Option C. Immediately halt all work related to the concrete pour until the excavation edge is properly secured and a thorough hazard assessment is completed. Option D. Proceed with the concrete pour as scheduled, instructing workers to be extra vigilant around the excavation and planning to address the unsecured edge after the pour is completed. Correct answer is C. Immediately halt all work related to the concrete pour until the excavation edge is properly secured and a thorough hazard assessment is completed. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for construction safety supervisors, balancing immediate production pressures with the imperative to uphold safety standards. The challenge lies in the inherent tension between meeting project deadlines and ensuring the well-being of workers, requiring a supervisor to make critical decisions under pressure. Careful judgment is essential to prevent accidents, protect workers, and maintain legal compliance. The correct approach involves proactively identifying potential hazards and implementing control measures before work commences, even if it means a slight delay. This aligns with the fundamental principles of construction safety management, which prioritize hazard prevention over reaction. Specifically, under OSHA General Duty Clause, Section 5(1) of the OSH Act, employers have a general duty to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. This proactive stance, which includes thorough pre-task planning and hazard assessment, directly fulfills this obligation by preventing exposure to risks. It also reflects an ethical commitment to worker safety, demonstrating that the supervisor values human life and health above expediency. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate work commencement without adequate hazard assessment fails to meet the General Duty Clause. It creates an environment where recognized hazards can lead to serious injury or fatality, directly violating the spirit and letter of OSHA regulations. Ethically, this approach demonstrates negligence and a disregard for worker welfare, potentially leading to severe consequences for both the workers and the company, including legal penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which involves addressing hazards only after they are reported by workers, is reactive rather than preventative. While addressing reported hazards is necessary, relying solely on this method means that unobserved or unacknowledged hazards remain unaddressed, increasing the risk of accidents. This approach falls short of the proactive hazard identification and control expected of a safety supervisor under OSHA. It also places an undue burden on workers to identify and report all dangers, which is not a substitute for a supervisor's responsibility to actively scan for and mitigate risks. Finally, an approach that involves deferring safety concerns to a later time to maintain the schedule is a direct abdication of the supervisor's safety responsibilities. This is a clear violation of OSHA standards, which require immediate attention to recognized hazards. Ethically, it signals to the workforce that safety is secondary to productivity, fostering a culture of risk-taking and potentially leading to severe incidents. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough hazard identification and risk assessment for all planned activities. This should be followed by the implementation of appropriate control measures, prioritizing elimination and substitution, then engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally, personal protective equipment. If these measures require a delay to ensure proper implementation, the supervisor must communicate the necessity of this delay to project management, emphasizing the legal and ethical imperative of worker safety. This structured approach ensures that safety is integrated into the workflow, not treated as an afterthought. Question 9. The analysis reveals that despite the presence of comprehensive written safety protocols and regular toolbox talks, a construction site continues to experience a concerning number of minor injuries and near misses. The supervisor observes that workers often bypass certain safety steps when they believe they are not being directly observed, and there is a general reluctance to report minor incidents or potential hazards for fear of repercussions. Which approach best addresses the underlying issues impacting the site's safety culture and promotes a more proactive safety environment? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of the written safety protocols to ensure they are technically sound, and then reinforce their importance through more frequent mandatory toolbox talks. Option B. Implement a stricter disciplinary policy for all safety violations, focusing on immediate and severe penalties to deter future occurrences. Option C. Delegate the responsibility for improving safety culture to the site's designated safety officer, who will then conduct independent audits and implement corrective actions. Option D. Actively engage the workforce in identifying safety barriers. Encourage open reporting of all incidents and near misses without fear of reprisal, and collaboratively develop practical solutions to improve safe work practices. The correct answer is B. Implement a stricter disciplinary policy for all safety violations, focusing on immediate and severe penalties to deter future occurrences. Explanation. The analysis reveals a common challenge in construction safety: the disconnect between stated safety policies and their actual implementation on the ground, directly impacting safety culture. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a supervisor to move beyond mere compliance and actively foster a proactive safety environment. It demands keen observation, effective communication, and the ability to influence behavior, all while managing project timelines and budgets. The supervisor must discern the root causes of safety lapses, which often stem from underlying cultural issues rather than isolated incidents. The correct approach involves a supervisor actively engaging with the workforce to understand their perspectives on safety, identifying barriers to safe practices, and collaboratively developing solutions. This aligns with OSHA emphasis on a strong safety and health program, which includes employee participation and management commitment. Specifically, OSHA General Duty Clause, Section 5(a)(1) of the OSH Act, requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards. A positive safety culture, fostered through open communication and employee involvement, is a key component in fulfilling this obligation. Ethical considerations also demand that supervisors prioritize the well-being of their workers, which is best achieved through a culture where safety is valued and practiced by all. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on disciplinary actions for rule violations. While enforcement is necessary, a purely punitive approach can breed resentment, discourage reporting of near misses, and create a climate of fear, thereby undermining safety culture. This fails to address the systemic issues that may lead to violations and contradicts the principle of continuous improvement inherent in effective safety management systems. Another incorrect approach is to assume that having written safety procedures is sufficient. Regulations like those from OSHA mandate not just the existence of policies, but their effective implementation and communication. If supervisors do not actively promote and reinforce these procedures, and if workers do not understand or feel empowered to follow them, the written word becomes meaningless. This approach neglects the crucial element of embedding safety into the daily work practices and mindset of the team. A third incorrect approach is to delegate all safety responsibilities to a dedicated safety officer. While safety officers play a vital role, the primary responsibility for day-to-day safety on a construction site rests with supervisors. A supervisor's direct interaction with the crew is paramount in shaping their safety behavior and ensuring immediate adherence to protocols. Abdicating this responsibility to a specialist, without active supervisor involvement, creates a gap in the safety management system and weakens the overall safety culture. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve: 1. Observation and assessment. Actively observe work practices and identify deviations from safety protocols and potential hazards. 2. Root cause analysis. Investigate the underlying reasons for safety lapses, considering factors beyond individual error, such as communication breakdowns, inadequate training, or cultural norms. 3. Communication and engagement. Foster open dialogue with the workforce about safety concerns, actively listen to their feedback, and involve them in problem solving. 4. Collaborative solution development. Work with the team to implement practical and effective solutions that address identified issues and reinforce safe behaviors. 5. Continuous improvement. Regularly review safety performance, adapt strategies as needed, and consistently reinforce the importance of a strong safety culture. Question 10. The audit findings indicate that while hazard control plans are being documented for new construction phases, the implemented controls appear to be reactive rather than proactive, with a heavy reliance on personal protective equipment, PPE, for many identified risks, and a lack of documented review cycles for their effectiveness. Considering OSHA regulatory framework for construction safety, which of the following represents the most effective and compliant approach to developing and implementing hazard control plans in this scenario? Option A. Focus on training workers on the proper use and limitations of PPE, as this is the most cost-effective method for immediate risk reduction and is readily auditable. Option B. Delegate the responsibility of hazard control plan development and implementation to the foreman on each site, ensuring they are aware of the general safety requirements. Option C. Enhance the documentation of PPE usage and conduct brief toolbox, talks on its importance to satisfy audit requirements and ensure immediate compliance. Option D. Immediately revise all existing hazard control plans to prioritize engineering and administrative controls where feasible before implementing any new controls, and establish a formal review process for all implemented controls. The correct answer is C. Enhance the documentation of PPE usage and conduct brief toolbox, talks on its importance to satisfy audit requirements and ensure immediate compliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for safety supervisors, balancing immediate operational needs with the long-term effectiveness of hazard control plans. Professional challenge lies in ensuring that the implemented controls are not merely superficial, but are robust, sustainable, and demonstrably reduce risk to an acceptable level, as mandated by regulatory frameworks. The supervisor must exercise sound judgment to avoid shortcuts that could compromise worker safety and regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves a systematic, multi-layered strategy for developing and implementing hazard control plans. This begins with a thorough hazard identification and risk assessment process, followed by the selection of controls based on the hierarchy of controls: elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment. Crucially, it includes a robust implementation phase with clear communication, training, and resource allocation, followed by ongoing monitoring, evaluation, and revision. This comprehensive approach aligns with the principles of OSHA General Duty Clause 29 CFR 1926, 20B, 1, and 29 CFR 1926, 21B, 2, which requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards and to instruct employees in safe work practices. Ethical considerations also demand proactive risk management to protect the well-being of all personnel. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate compliance without addressing the root cause of the hazard fails to meet regulatory expectations. For instance, relying exclusively on personal protective equipment, PPE, without exploring engineering or administrative controls, when feasible, is often considered the least effective and can be a regulatory failure under OSHA hierarchy of controls. This approach may satisfy a superficial audit, but does not adequately control the hazard and can lead to increased risk if PPE is misused, fails, or is not consistently worn. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness in hazard assessment or control selection is also professionally unacceptable. This can lead to the implementation of inadequate controls that do not effectively mitigate the identified risks, potentially violating OSHA requirement for effective hazard control measures. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold the supervisor's responsibility to ensure a safe working environment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This includes 1. Clearly defining the scope of the hazard and the affected workforce. 2. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment involving relevant personnel. 3. Prioritizing control measures according to the hierarchy of controls, favoring more effective and permanent solutions. 4. Developing a detailed implementation plan with clear responsibilities, timelines, and necessary resources. 5. Establishing a system for regular monitoring, feedback, and continuous improvement of the control plan. This systematic process ensures that hazard control plans are not only compliant, but also effective in protecting workers. Question 11. Operational review demonstrates that guardrails are installed around elevated work areas, safety nets are deployed below certain tasks, and workers are equipped with personal fall arrest systems. As the safety-trained supervisor in construction, STSC, what is the most appropriate best practice approach to ensure the effectiveness and compliance of these fall protection systems? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive inspection of all fall protection systems to verify compliance with applicable OSHA standards, including structural integrity of guardrails, proper installation and clearance of safety nets, and correct use, inspection, and anchorage of personal fall arrest systems. Option B. Rely on the worker's self-assessment of their personal fall arrest systems and the general appearance of guardrails and safety nets. Option C. Assume the fall protection systems are adequate because they are present and visible, and focus on other immediate site safety concerns. Option D. Prioritize the completion of scheduled construction tasks and address any potential fall protection deficiencies only if a specific incident occurs. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive inspection of all fall protection systems to verify compliance with applicable OSHA standards, including structural integrity of guardrails, proper installation and clearance of safety nets, and correct use, inspection, and anchorage of personal fall arrest systems. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a supervisor to balance immediate operational needs with the absolute mandate of worker safety, specifically concerning fall protection. The supervisor must not only identify potential hazards, but also ensure that the chosen protective measures are not only present, but also compliant with regulatory standards and effectively implemented. The decision-making process involves understanding the hierarchy of controls and applying it rigorously to fall hazards. The correct approach involves a thorough evaluation of the existing fall protection systems against established regulatory requirements, focusing on their effectiveness and compliance. This means verifying that guardrails meet specific height and strength requirements, safety nets are properly installed and tensioned, and personal fall arrest systems, FAS, are correctly selected, inspected, and used by trained personnel. The regulatory justification stems from OSHA General Duty Clause and specific standards for fall protection in construction, e.g., 29 CFR 1926 Subpart M, which mandate employers to provide a safe workplace and implement appropriate fall protection measures. Ethically, the supervisor has a duty of care to protect workers from foreseeable harm. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the mere presence of fall protection equipment guarantees safety. For instance, relying solely on the visual presence of guardrails without verifying their structural integrity or proper installation is a regulatory failure. OSHA standards specify minimum load-bearing capacities and construction requirements for guardrails. Similarly, assuming that safety nets are adequate simply because they are installed without checking for proper mesh size, clearance from the work area, and secure attachment points violates regulatory mandates and best practices. Another incorrect approach is to permit the use of FAS without ensuring proper training, fit, inspection, and anchorage, which directly contravenes OSHA requirements for FAS components and their use. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Hazard identification. Recognize potential fall hazards. 2. Regulatory review. Understand applicable OSHA standards for fall protection. 3. Control assessment. Evaluate existing control measures, guardrails, nets, FAS against regulatory requirements and best practices. 4. Verification. Conduct physical inspections and review documentation, training records, inspection logs to confirm compliance and effectiveness. 5. Corrective action. Implement necessary modifications or retraining if deficiencies are found. 6. Documentation. Maintain records of inspections, training, and corrective action. Question 12. The performance metrics show a consistent pattern of incomplete or improperly documented atmospheric testing records for confined space entries on a large commercial construction project. As the safety-trained supervisor in construction, STSC, what is the most effective and compliant approach to address this issue? Option A. Immediately order the replacement of all atmospheric testing equipment on site, assuming the current equipment is faulty, and instruct foremen to ensure new equipment is used. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the atmospheric testing procedures, including personnel training, equipment calibration, and maintenance logs, and the process for documenting test results, followed by targeted retraining and procedural reinforcement. Option C. Issue a general memo to all site personnel emphasizing the importance of atmospheric testing and warning of disciplinary action for future noncompliance. Option D. Rely on verbal confirmations from foremen that atmospheric testing is being performed as required, without further verification or review of documentation. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the atmospheric testing procedures, including personnel training, equipment calibration and maintenance logs, and the process for documenting test results, followed by targeted retraining and procedural reinforcement. Explanation. the performance metrics show a concerning trend in atmospheric testing compliance on a large commercial construction project. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a supervisor to balance immediate project demands with the non-negotiable safety requirements mandated by regulations. The supervisor must not only identify the root cause of the non-compliance, but also implement effective corrective actions that prevent recurrence, all while maintaining project momentum. The ethical imperative to protect workers from hazardous atmospheres overrides any pressure to overlook or minimize safety protocols. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the existing atmospheric testing procedures, including the training of personnel responsible for conducting tests, the calibration and maintenance of testing equipment, and the documentation of test results. This approach is right because it directly addresses the systemic issues contributing to the performance metric shortfall. Specifically, it aligns with OSHA requirements under 29 CFR 1926 Subpart AA, confined spaces, and Subpart S, electrical, which mandate competent persons to conduct atmospheric testing, proper equipment use, and accurate record keeping. Ethically, this proactive and comprehensive review demonstrates a commitment to worker safety and due diligence. An incorrect approach that relies solely on issuing a general warning to the crew without investigating the cause fails to address the underlying problems. This is a regulatory failure because it does not ensure that the specific requirements for atmospheric testing, such as the competency of testers or the proper functioning of equipment, are being met. It is also an ethical failure as it risks continued exposure to hazards. Another incorrect approach, which involves blaming the testing equipment and ordering immediate replacement without verifying its calibration or the competency of the users, is also professionally unacceptable. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the requirement for proper equipment maintenance and calibration logs, and it does not address potential human error or inadequate training. Ethically, it is a superficial fix that does not guarantee improved safety outcomes. A third incorrect approach, which involves accepting verbal assurances from foremen that testing is being conducted without verifying documentation or observing the process, is a significant regulatory and ethical lapse. This is a regulatory failure because OSHA requires documented evidence of atmospheric testing. It is an ethical failure because it abdicates the supervisor's responsibility to ensure safety and relies on hearsay rather than verifiable evidence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, identify the specific performance gap. Second, investigate the root cause through observation, interviews, and documentation review. Third, consult relevant regulations and company policies. Fourth, develop and implement targeted corrective actions. And fifth, monitor the effectiveness of these actions through ongoing performance metrics and audits. Question 13. The risk matrix shows a high probability of a fall incident if work at height is not properly protected. You are supervising a crew installing ductwork near an edge. The designated anchor point for the fall protection system is not yet accessible due to ongoing work by another trade. A worker suggests using a temporary structural beam nearby as an anchor point, stating it looks solid and that delaying the work will cause significant schedule disruption. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Halt all work at height until a properly identified, rated, and inspected anchor point is available and connected to the fall protection system. Option B. Allow the worker to use the temporary structural beam as an anchor point after a visual inspection, as the schedule is critical. Option C. Ask the worker to confirm with their foreman that the temporary structural beam is acceptable as an anchor point before proceeding. Option D. Proceed with the work, instructing the worker to be extremely cautious and to avoid leaning over the edge, accepting the increased risk to meet the deadline. The correct answer is A. Halt all work at height until a properly identified, rated, and inspected anchor point is available and connected to the fall protection system. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it pits immediate project expediency against established safety protocols and the supervisor's ethical responsibility to ensure worker safety. The supervisor must balance the pressure to maintain schedule with the non-negotiable requirement for proper anchor point selection and inspection, which are critical for fall protection. The ethical dilemma arises from the potential for a shortcut to save time versus the significant risk of serious injury or fatality if an anchor point fails. The correct approach involves prioritizing the safety regulations and guidelines for anchor point selection and inspection. This means halting work until a suitable anchor point is identified, verified, and inspected according to the relevant standards, even if it causes a delay. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant because it upholds the supervisor's duty of care to their workers. Specifically, under OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, regulations in the U.S. construction industry, employers are required to provide fall protection for workers at heights above certain thresholds. This includes ensuring that any anchor points used for fall arrest or restraint systems meet specific strength and integrity requirements, as detailed in standards like 29 CFR 1926 Subpart M. The supervisor's responsibility is to ensure these requirements are met before work commences or continues. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with work using a potentially inadequate anchor point, perhaps based on the assumption that it looks strong enough, or because a delay is undesirable. This fails to adhere to the regulatory requirement for proper assessment and verification of anchor points. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for worker safety and a failure to fulfill the supervisor's duty of care. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the word of a worker or another tradesperson that the anchor point is safe without independent verification and inspection. This abdicates the supervisor's responsibility and bypasses the established safety procedures, creating a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the hazard, working at height without a verified anchor point. 2. Consulting relevant regulations and company safety policies, OSHA standards for fall protection and anchor points. 3. Assessing the risks associated with different courses of action. 4. Choosing the option that ensures compliance and worker safety, even if it impacts schedule. 5. Documenting the decision and the rationale, and communicating clearly with the crew. In this case, the decision must be to stop work and ensure proper anchor point selection and inspection. Question 14. Consider a scenario where a construction crew is about to begin a complex roofing repair involving working at heights and the use of specialized power tools. As the supervisor, you need to ensure all potential hazards are identified and controlled before work commences. Which of the following hazard recognition techniques would be the most effective and compliant method to implement in this situation? Option A. Conduct a formal job hazard analysis, JHA, by breaking down the roofing repair into specific tasks, identifying hazards for each task, and documenting control measures before the crew starts work. Option B. Wait for a hazard to become apparent during the work and then address it immediately. Option C. Rely on your personal experience as a supervisor to verbally brief the crew on general safety precautions for working at heights and with power tools. Option D. Have a brief, informal toolbox talk where the crew members casually mention any hazards they think might exist. The correct answer is A. Conduct a formal job hazard analysis, JHA, by breaking down the roofing repair into specific tasks, identifying hazards for each task, and documenting control measures before the crew starts work. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for construction supervisors, balancing the need for efficient workflow with the paramount requirement of ensuring worker safety through proactive hazard identification. The professional challenge lies in selecting the most effective and compliant method for hazard recognition that integrates seamlessly into daily operations without causing undue disruption. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen technique not only identifies potential risks, but also facilitates their mitigation in a timely and systematic manner, aligning with regulatory expectations. The correct approach involves a structured, documented process that systematically breaks down tasks into their component steps, identifies hazards associated with each step, and outlines control measures. This aligns directly with the principles of job hazard analysis, JHA, or job safety analysis, JSA, which are fundamental to OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, construction safety standards. Specifically, OSHA General Duty Clause, Section 5. 1 of the OSH Act mandates employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards. A JHA is a recognized and effective method for fulfilling this obligation by proactively identifying and controlling hazards before work begins. Furthermore, the emphasis on documenting these analyses and communicating them to the work crew is crucial for ensuring worker awareness and compliance. As required by various OSHA standards, related to training and hazard communication. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the supervisor's personal experience without a documented, systematic process fails to meet regulatory requirements. While experience is valuable, it is not a substitute for a formal hazard analysis. This approach risks overlooking hazards that may not be immediately apparent or that have changed due to site conditions. It also lacks the documentation necessary to demonstrate due diligence to regulatory bodies and to provide a clear record of identified hazards and control measures for future reference or training. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on addressing hazards as they arise, rather than proactively identifying them before work commences, is also deficient. This reactive strategy is contrary to the principles of effective safety management and OSHA emphasis on prevention. It increases the likelihood of incidents occurring, as hazards are only addressed after they have posed a risk to workers. This approach fails to meet the spirit and letter of regulations that require employers to anticipate and control hazards. A third incorrect approach that involves a cursory, informal discussion of potential hazards without a structured analysis or documentation is also inadequate. While pre-task planning is essential, its effectiveness is diminished if it lacks the rigor of a JHA. Without a systematic breakdown of tasks and specific hazard identification for each step, the discussion may be superficial, leading to the omission of critical risks and control measures. This informal method does not provide the necessary documentation to prove compliance or to ensure a thorough understanding of risks by all team members. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve understanding the regulatory mandate for hazard identification and control. Supervisors should prioritize proactive methods like JHA, which are recognized best practices and often implicitly or explicitly required by regulations. The decision-making framework should include 1. Understanding the specific tasks to be performed. 2. Systematically breaking down each task into its individual steps. 3. Identifying potential hazards associated with each step. 4. Determining appropriate control measures for each identified hazard. 5. Documenting the JHA and communicating it effectively to the work crew. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating JHAs as conditions change. Question 15. The assessment process reveals that a critical trenching operation is underway on a tight deadline project. The site supervisor observes that the trench, which is deeper than 4 feet, lacks any visible protective system such as sloping, shoring, or a trench box. When questioned, the foreman states that they are making good time and will get to the protective measures once they are done with this section. The supervisor is aware that the soil conditions are not stable. What is the most appropriate and ethically sound course of action for the supervisor? Option A. Immediately stop all work in and around the trench until a competent person has inspected the excavation and ensured that an adequate protective system is in place in accordance with OSHA regulations. Option B. Allow the foreman to complete the current section of work, with the understanding that protective measures will be implemented immediately afterward to avoid significant project delays. Option C. Advise the foreman to have the workers be extra cautious and to monitor the trench walls themselves while they continue working. Option D. Document the lack of protective measures and inform upper management of the situation, allowing the foreman to continue work while a formal review is conducted. The correct answer is A. Immediately stop all work in and around the trench until a competent person has inspected the excavation and ensured that an adequate protective system is in place in accordance with OSHA regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it forces a supervisor to balance immediate production pressures with the non-negotiable requirement for safety, specifically in the context of excavation and trenching. The ethical dilemma arises from the potential for financial or schedule penalties versus the absolute duty to protect workers from the severe hazards associated with trench collapses. Careful judgment is required to prioritize worker well-being over short-term project goals, a core tenet of construction safety supervision. The correct approach involves immediately halting work and ensuring the trench is properly protected before allowing any further operations. This aligns directly with OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, excavation and trenching standards, particularly 29 CFR 1926 Subpart P. This subpart mandates that employers must protect employees from cave-ins by providing protective systems, ensuring adequate sloping or shoring, or using a trench box. A competent person, as defined by OSHA, must be on site to inspect the trench daily and as conditions change, and to identify and correct hazards. The supervisor's immediate action to stop work and verify compliance with these protective measures is the only ethically and regulatorily sound response. An incorrect approach would be to allow work to continue with minimal or no protective measures, perhaps with the promise of implementing them later or as soon as possible. This directly violates OSHA General Duty Clause, Section 5(a)(1) of the OSH Act, which requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. It also fails to meet the specific requirements of 29 CFR 1926 Subpart P regarding protective systems. Ethically, this demonstrates a disregard for worker safety and a prioritization of production over life. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the worker's perceived experience or informal assurances that the trench is safe. OSHA regulations do not permit informal assessments of trench safety. They require a competent person to conduct formal inspections and ensure specific protective systems are in place. Relying on informal assurances bypasses the established regulatory framework designed to prevent fatalities and serious injuries. A third incorrect approach would be to only address the issue after a near miss or an incident occurs. This reactive approach is fundamentally flawed and contrary to the proactive nature of effective safety management. OSHA standards are designed to prevent incidents, not merely to respond to them. Waiting for a problem to manifest is a failure of supervisory responsibility and a direct violation of the employer's duty to provide a safe working environment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of applicable regulations, such as OSHA 29 CFR 1926 Subpart P. Supervisors must be empowered and expected to stop work immediately when a hazard is identified, regardless of production pressures. This involves a commitment to a stop-work authority culture, where safety concerns are addressed without fear of reprisal. The process should include 1. Hazard identification and assessment, 2. Immediate cessation of work if a serious hazard exists, 3. Verification of compliance with regulatory requirements, 4. Communication with the competent person and affected workers, and 5. Documentation of the hazard and corrective actions taken. Question 16. Quality control measures reveal that a critical structural component installation is scheduled to begin immediately to meet a tight project deadline, but recent weather reports indicate a significant increase in wind speeds for the duration of the installation. Which of the following approaches best addresses the potential OHS implications? Option A. Delegate the responsibility of monitoring wind conditions and implementing immediate safety adjustments to the workers performing the installation. Option B. Conduct a new, specific risk assessment for the high wind conditions, identifying potential hazards related to the installation process under these specific environmental factors, and implement necessary control measures before commencing work. Option C. Postpone the installation until the weather improves, even if it means missing the project deadline, and inform stakeholders of the delay due to safety concerns. Option D. Proceed with the installation as scheduled, assuming the experienced crew can manage the conditions and address any safety concerns that arise during the process. The correct answer is B. Conduct a new, specific risk assessment for the high wind conditions, identifying potential hazards related to the installation process under these specific environmental factors, and implement necessary control measures before commencing work. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a supervisor must balance immediate production demands with the fundamental OHS obligation to ensure a safe working environment. The pressure to meet deadlines can lead to overlooking or downplaying potential hazards, creating a conflict between operational efficiency and worker well-being. A supervisor's judgment is critical in navigating this tension, as their decisions directly impact the safety of their team and the legal compliance of the organization. The correct approach involves a proactive and systematic risk assessment process that prioritizes hazard identification, evaluation, and control before work commences or when changes occur. This aligns with the core principles of OHS management systems and regulatory requirements, such as those mandated by OSHA in the U.S. construction industry. Specifically, OSHA General Duty Clause, Section 5(a)(1) of the OSH Act, requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. A thorough risk assessment is the primary mechanism for fulfilling this obligation. Furthermore, ethical considerations demand that a supervisor act in the best interest of their workers' safety, even if it means temporarily halting or modifying operations. An incorrect approach that relies on assuming existing controls are adequate without reevaluation fails to acknowledge that conditions can change and new hazards can emerge. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a potential violation of regulatory requirements to continuously monitor and assess workplace safety. It also ethically fails to uphold the supervisor's duty of care. Another incorrect approach, which involves proceeding with work while deferring risk assessment until after an incident, is fundamentally reactive and places workers at immediate risk. This is a direct contravention of proactive safety management principles and regulatory expectations. It signifies a failure to implement preventative measures and can lead to severe consequences, including injuries, fatalities, and significant legal penalties. A third incorrect approach, which involves delegating the entire risk assessment process to workers without adequate oversight or guidance, can be problematic. While worker input is invaluable, the supervisor retains ultimate responsibility for ensuring the effectiveness of the risk assessment and the implementation of controls. This approach may not guarantee a comprehensive evaluation of all potential hazards, especially those requiring specialized knowledge or a broader perspective of the project's scope. It also risks abdicating supervisory responsibility. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the scope of work and potential hazards. This involves consulting relevant documentation, engaging with the work crew, and observing the work environment. The next step is to systematically identify hazards, assess their risks, likelihood, and severity, and determine appropriate control measures. This process should be documented and communicated to the affected workers. If the risk assessment indicates that the work cannot proceed safely with existing controls, the supervisor must have the authority and willingness to stop the work until adequate controls are implemented. This proactive, documented, and collaborative approach ensures compliance and prioritizes worker safety. Question 17. Governance review demonstrates that a construction project is experiencing significant delays. The site supervisor is under pressure to expedite work. Regarding fall protection equipment, which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and professional safety practice? Option A. Implement a documented, regular inspection schedule for all fall protection equipment, ensuring that any defective items are immediately removed from service and replaced, with all inspections and maintenance activities recorded. Option B. Defer detailed equipment inspections until the project's completion to avoid any potential work stoppages. Option C. Conduct informal visual checks of fall protection equipment only when a specific concern arises or when a piece of equipment appears visibly damaged. Option D. Rely solely on the manufacturer's general maintenance recommendations without establishing a site-specific inspection protocol. The correct answer is A. Implement a documented, regular inspection schedule for all fall protection equipment, ensuring that any defective items are immediately removed from service and replaced, with all inspections and maintenance activities recorded. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a supervisor to balance immediate operational needs with the non-negotiable requirement for safety compliance, specifically regarding fall protection equipment. The pressure to maintain project timelines can create a temptation to overlook or defer critical safety procedures. Careful judgment is required to ensure that safety is not compromised for expediency. The correct approach involves a proactive and documented system for fall protection equipment inspection and maintenance, aligned with regulatory requirements. This approach is right because it directly addresses the employer's responsibility under OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration regulations, specifically 29 CFR 1926 Subpart M, Fall Protection. This regulation mandates that employers ensure all fall protection equipment is inspected before each use and maintained in good condition. A supervisor's role is to implement and enforce these requirements, which includes establishing a clear inspection schedule, ensuring proper documentation of inspections and any necessary repairs or replacements, and removing defective equipment from service immediately. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of equipment failure during use, thereby preventing falls and serious injuries, and demonstrates due diligence in fulfilling legal and ethical obligations. An incorrect approach that relies on informal, Ad hoc checks fails because it lacks the systematic rigor required by OSHA. This approach creates a significant risk of undetected defects, as visual checks without a defined protocol are prone to human error and oversight. It also fails to provide the necessary documentation to prove compliance if an incident occurs, leaving the employer vulnerable to citations and penalties. Another incorrect approach that involves deferring inspections until a problem is suspected is fundamentally flawed. This reactive stance directly contradicts the before-each-use mandate of the regulations. It assumes that equipment is safe until proven otherwise, which is the opposite of the safety principle. This approach significantly increases the likelihood of equipment failure during critical moments, leading to potential accidents and injuries. A third incorrect approach that involves relying solely on the manufacturer's recommendations without establishing a site-specific inspection and maintenance program is also insufficient. While manufacturer guidelines are important, they do not absolve the employer of their responsibility to implement a comprehensive program that addresses the specific conditions and usage patterns on their construction site. OSHA requires the employer to ensure equipment is suitable for the intended use and properly maintained, which necessitates a site-specific plan beyond generic manufacturer advice. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific regulatory requirements, e.g., OSHA 29 CFR 1926 Subpart M. 2. Developing and implementing clear documented procedures for inspection and maintenance that meet or exceed these requirements. 3. Training all relevant personnel on these procedures and the importance of compliance. 4. Regularly auditing the effectiveness of the program and making necessary adjustments. 5. Prioritizing safety compliance over short-term operational pressures, understanding that the long-term consequences of non-compliance are far greater. Question 18. Market research demonstrates that timely scaffold erection is crucial for project timelines. As a safety-trained supervisor in construction, you are overseeing a project where a new scaffold is being erected. Which of the following actions best demonstrates compliance with regulatory requirements for scaffold erection and dismantling procedures? Option A. Relying on the experienced scaffold erectors to follow their usual procedures and the manufacturer's general erection manual, without conducting a separate site-specific hazard assessment or direct supervisory verification. Option B. Delegating the responsibility for scaffold safety entirely to the erector foreman, assuming they are fully aware of all site-specific hazards and regulatory requirements. Option C. Conducting a site-specific hazard assessment for the scaffold, verifying the scaffold design is appropriate for the intended use, ensuring all components are inspected, confirming proper foundation and anchorage, and establishing clear communication protocols for the erection and dismantling phases, with a designated competent person overseeing all activities. Option D. Proceeding with scaffold erection as quickly as possible to meet the project schedule, with only a brief visual inspection of the erected scaffold before it is put into use. Correct answer is C. Conducting a site-specific hazard assessment for the scaffold, verifying the scaffold design is appropriate for the intended use, ensuring all components are inspected, confirming proper foundation and anchorage, and establishing clear communication protocols for the erection and dismantling phases, with a designated competent person overseeing all activities. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a supervisor to balance the immediate need for project progress with the paramount importance of worker safety during scaffold erection and dismantling. The dynamic nature of construction sites, coupled with the inherent risks associated with working at height, necessitates rigorous adherence to established safety protocols. A supervisor's judgment is critical in ensuring that all procedures are not only understood, but also meticulously followed by the crew. The correct approach involves a supervisor actively participating in the pre-erection planning and conducting a thorough site-specific hazard assessment for the scaffold. This includes verifying that the scaffold design is appropriate for the intended use, ensuring all components are inspected for damage, confirming proper foundation and anchorage, and establishing clear communication protocols for the erection and dismantling phases. This proactive and documented approach directly aligns with the requirements of OSHA Scaffold Standard 29 CFR 1926 Subpart L, which mandates that employers provide safe scaffolds and that competent persons oversee their erection, dismantling, and use. The emphasis on a competent person's direct involvement and documented hazard assessment is a cornerstone of regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility to protect workers. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the scaffold erector's experience without direct supervisory oversight and verification. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for a competent person to be designated and to actively supervise. It also bypasses the crucial step of a site-specific hazard assessment, potentially overlooking unique site conditions or project-specific risks that the erectors might not identify or prioritize. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a manufacturer's general erection manual is sufficient without a site-specific assessment and adaptation of those instructions to the actual work environment. While manufacturer guidelines are important, they do not absolve the employer and supervisor of their responsibility to ensure the scaffold is safe for the specific site and task. Finally, proceeding with erection without a clear communication plan for the crew, especially regarding potential hazards and emergency procedures, creates an environment ripe for accidents and violates the principle of ensuring all workers are informed and protected. Professional reasoning in such situations requires a supervisor to prioritize safety over schedule. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the specific regulatory requirements applicable to scaffold work, e.g., OSHA 29 CFR 1926 Subpart L. 2. Recognizing the role and responsibilities of a competent person. 3. Conducting a thorough, documented hazard assessment tailored to the specific site and scaffold configuration. 4. Implementing and verifying that all safety procedures, including proper erection, inspection, and communication, are followed. 5. Empowering workers to stop work if they identify unsafe conditions. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates a perception that while fall protection training is being conducted, there are concerns about its practical effectiveness in preventing incidents. As a safety-trained supervisor in construction, what is the most appropriate approach to address this feedback and ensure compliance with fall protection training requirements? Option A. Assume that employees are adequately trained if they have attended the general site safety orientation, which includes a brief mention of fall hazards. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of the current fall protection training program, evaluating its content, delivery methods, and the competency of the trainers and trainees in relation to site-specific fall hazards. Option C. Encourage experienced workers to informally mentor newer employees on fall protection techniques as needed. Option D. Review employee training rosters to confirm that all personnel have signed off on fall protection training modules. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of the current fall protection training program, evaluating its content, delivery methods, and the competency of the trainers and trainees in relation to site-specific fall hazards. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a supervisor to balance the immediate need for productivity with the non-negotiable requirement for comprehensive fall protection training. The pressure to complete a project on time can lead to shortcuts, but failing to ensure proper training for fall hazards directly violates regulatory mandates and ethical responsibilities to protect workers. The supervisor must exercise sound judgment to identify and address the root cause of the training deficiency without compromising safety. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and systematic risk assessment of the fall protection training program. This means not just verifying completion records, but actively evaluating the effectiveness of the training itself. It requires understanding the specific fall hazards present on the site, the tasks being performed, and ensuring the training directly addresses these elements. This approach aligns with OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, General Duty Clause and specific fall protection standards, e.g., 29 CFR 1926 Subpart M, which mandate that employees exposed to fall hazards must be trained by a qualified person. The training must enable the employee to recognize the hazards of falling and the procedures to be followed in order to minimize the hazard. A thorough risk assessment ensures that the training is not merely a formality, but a robust system designed to prevent injuries. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that focuses solely on verifying that employees have signed training rosters without assessing the quality or relevance of the training content is a regulatory and ethical failure. This is a superficial compliance check that does not guarantee worker understanding or competency. thus failing to meet the spirit and intent of OSHA regulations. It creates a false sense of security. An approach that assumes all employees are adequately trained because they have attended a general safety orientation is also a failure. General orientations often lack the specificity required for fall protection, which can involve unique hazards depending on the work area, equipment, and tasks. OSHA requires training to be specific to the hazards employees will face. An approach that relies on peer-to-peer informal instruction as a substitute for formal, qualified training is problematic. While experienced workers can share knowledge, it does not guarantee that the information is accurate, complete, or delivered in a way that meets regulatory requirements for a qualified person to provide training. This can lead to the perpetuation of incorrect practices and a failure to address all relevant hazards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to safety management. This involves 1. Hazard identification. Continuously identify potential fall hazards on the job site. 2. Training needs assessment. Determine the specific training required for each identified hazard and task. 3. Training delivery and verification. Ensure training is delivered by qualified individuals, is relevant, and that competency is assessed, not just attendance. 4. Program evaluation. Regularly review and assess the effectiveness of the training program through observation, feedback, and incident analysis. 5. Continuous improvement. Make adjustments to the training program based on the evaluation to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance. Question 20. System analysis indicates that a construction project requires a designated competent person for fall protection oversight. The project manager suggests assigning the foreman, who has a general construction safety certification, but no specific training or experience in fall protection systems or rescue procedures. The site safety officer proposes a more rigorous approach, requiring verification of specific fall protection training, demonstrated experience in hazard recognition related to working at heights, and the ability to implement rescue plans, which approach best aligns with regulatory requirements for qualified and competent persons in construction. Option A. Relying on the foreman's willingness to take on the responsibility, assuming they will learn on the job. Option B. Assuming that any foreman with general safety knowledge is inherently competent for all safety-specific roles. Option C. Verifying the foreman's specific fall protection training, demonstrated experience in hazard recognition related to working at heights, and ability to implement rescue plans. Option D. Assigning the foreman based on their general safety certification and foreman title. The correct answer is D. Assigning the foreman based on their general safety certification and foreman title. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for construction supervisors, ensuring that individuals assigned critical safety roles possess the necessary qualifications and competence, not just a title. The professional challenge lies in distinguishing between formal certification and actual ability to perform duties effectively and safely, especially when faced with time pressures or perceived cost savings. Careful judgment is required to avoid compromising safety for expediency. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of an individual's training, experience, and demonstrated ability to identify hazards, implement controls, and enforce safety regulations relevant to the specific construction tasks. This aligns with OSHA General Duty Clause and specific standards that require employers to ensure that employees are competent to perform their assigned tasks. Qualified person is typically defined by OSHA as someone who, by possession of a recognized degree, certificate, or professional standing, or who by extensive knowledge, training, and experience successfully demonstrated the ability to solve or resolve problems relating to the subject matter, the work, or the project. A competent person is one who is capable of identifying existing and predictable hazards in the surroundings or working conditions which are unsanitary, hazardous, or dangerous to employees, and who has authorization to take prompt corrective measures to eliminate them. Therefore, verifying both formal qualifications and practical competence is paramount. An incorrect approach that relies solely on a job title or a general certification without assessing specific experience and demonstrated ability to identify and correct hazards is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This overlooks the nuances of competence, which is task-specific and requires practical application. Another incorrect approach, focusing only on the individual's willingness to accept the responsibility without verifying their actual knowledge and skills, creates a dangerous situation where a person may be assigned a critical safety role they are not equipped to handle, leading to potential violations of safety standards and increased risk of accidents. Relying on a supervisor's assumption of competence without objective verification is also a failure, as it bypasses the employer's responsibility to ensure a safe working environment through properly qualified and competent personnel. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Clearly defining the specific safety responsibilities for the role in question. 2. Establishing objective criteria for qualification and competence based on regulatory requirements and the specific hazards of the work. 3. Implementing a verification process that includes reviewing training records, certifications, and conducting interviews or practical assessments to gauge an individual's knowledge and experience. 4. Documenting the assessment process and the rationale for assigning individuals to safety-critical roles. 5. Regularly reevaluating competence, especially when job duties or site conditions change.